Greetings, and thank you for joining the Capstone Group for this important Zoom event. Before we get to our main presentation, a bit about the Capstone Group. We were founded in August of 2018, inspired by the Howard University student protests that took place earlier that year. We are a dynamic collaborative of Howard University alumni, faculty, students, staff, and community that proactively address issues relevant to the Howard University community. We provide an empowering platform to exchange ideas and experiences to effect positive change. Now, sit back and enjoy the presentation, and remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Capstone Group's conversation around the COVID-19. This is our fifth in a series of programming that we have hosted on this subject in the past year, and we've been very fortunate to have two outstanding and distinguished guests join us this evening. We have Dr. Terri Peters and Dr. Norvell Coots. Dr. Peters is currently the president and CEO of the Quality of Life Pharmacy and Health. She's also the pharmacy manager for the University of Maryland Laurel Medical Center. She's a known author and speaker on critical health topics. She's a compound pharmacist by profession and a retired member of the Air Force, and also a member of the Professional Compounding Centers of America. Dr. Coots, who's also on tap for us this evening, is the president and CEO of Holy Cross Health and Trinity Health of Maryland. He's chairman of the board for the Maryland Physician Care. He's an executive committee member for the Maryland Hospital Association. He's a member of the governor's COVID task force and a retired brigadier general with the U.S. Army. Under his command, while in the Army, Dr. Coots was the commanding general for the Regional Health Command of Europe and also the command surgeon for the U.S. Army in Europe. He was the deputy commanding general of the U.S. Army Medical Command and the assistant surgeon general of the Army, as well as surgeon general of the U.S. Air Force in Afghanistan. And finally noteworthy, he was the final commander of the historic Walter Reed healthcare system here in Washington, D.C., and no less noteworthy, he is a proud Bison. So we're glad to have you both here, and we really want to express our gratitude to both of you for your service in the military, especially as today is a special day in the military community. So in our conversations this evening, we're going to be presenting information that is impactful around the SARS COVID-2 programming and where we have traveled in the past year. Our conversation this evening is a personal one. We understand that people have to make decisions about whether to vax or not to vax. And what we hope to accomplish this evening is to provide you with some facts, some hard data, so that you can make those decisions about what to do for yourself and your family members. Before we begin our conversation this evening, I'd like to also acknowledge the Capstone Group for their undying support and contributions to these series of programmings on this platform. And we're particularly thankful that we have the support from our community members and participants, those of you who've joined the call this evening. And what we'd like you to do at this point is to sit back, get comfortable, pack your patience in for us a little bit, be open-minded because we know this is a controversial topic. We want you to listen to these experts so you can make a decision about what would be appropriate thing for you to do. And at the end of their presentation, we will open up the floor for question and answers. And in the meantime, what we would like you to do is to utilize the chat. So if you have any questions, put it there, and we will be capturing it for review in the Q&A section of the program. And at that point, we will also open the floor to other questions. Everyone, please focus your attention on the screen. Take a look at the Bloomberg COVID visualizer.
It shows a real-time view of the number of people who have been affected by the SARS COVID-2 virus. Since last year, when the Capstone Group did the first of several programs about the pandemic, the loss of life in April 2020 was only 10,000 souls. Now, there are over 562,000 people who are deceased. That's an increase of over 550,000 souls in a year. Currently, there are 6.9 million people who have tested positive for the virus and 23 million people who've recovered from their exposure. At this time, there are a total of 143 million people who have received a dose of the SARS COVID-2 vaccine.
Our talking points for this evening will indicate the information that you need to have in terms of what is the virus. I'm sure over the past year, many of you have seen a lot of information about the virus. In fact, this flyer that we have here is basically a graphic giving you some ideas about the different structures around the virus. We'll talk about how the virus gains access to the body, because that is pretty critical to how we're going to be developing the vaccines and how they are going to be effective. What's the impact on the virus on our bodies? We're going to discuss briefly conversation around mistrust in our communities as it relates to the situation with the viruses. And then one of the concerns that we'll be talking about is what are the benefits of taking the vaccine? And the big question everybody's asking is, how do we return to life as normal? What is that going to look like? What does that really mean? And then some recommendations and suggestions around what you can do to try to ensure that your well-being is being maintained. We'll have the call to action, and again, some recommendations about what you can do. And then finally, we'll open up the floor to the questions that people have. We'll ask your information in a form of a survey to share with us some of your thoughts around this program. And then we will share some other public information with you that we think will be beneficial. Next, I'd like to introduce again our first presenter for the evening, our featured guest, Dr. Terri Peters. As I mentioned before, Terri is a compound pharmacist, and her focus is on clinical disease management, which makes her uniquely qualified to provide information in this area. She and her husband are both founders and co-CEOs of the Quality of Life and Health Pharmacy. Terri graduated from the U.S. Air Force program in pharmacy. She also has been very well connected in terms of community medicine and works with physicians in the community. Terri and her team at University of Maryland Laurel Hospital have been credited with supporting thousands of lives, people surviving from critical care under the SARS COVID-2 in the past year. So she should be commended for the yeoman's effort. Both Terri and Dr. Coots have been on the front line for well over a year. I think Dr. Coots said something about 58 weeks or something to that effect without a break. So these folks are really appreciated for taking time out of their schedules this evening to work with us and help us understand what we're facing off in our Black, Indigenous, people of color communities. Terri in particular is focusing her practice on women's health, hormone therapy, diabetes management, and supplementation, because some people prefer the natural path. And so Terri's an advocate for that. So Terri, take it away. If you can see the screen, we've got your, what is a virus, so that we can have a baseline for this conversation. Thank you for joining, Terri. All yours.
Just to give you a short version of the definition, it's any of a large group of submicroscopic infectious agents that are usually regarded as non-living, extremely complex molecules. So how does the virus gain entrance into the body? The common cold coronaviruses tend to infect only the upper respiratory tract, mainly the nose and throat, making them highly contagious. The SARS primarily infects the lower respiratory system, the lungs, and therefore causes a much more lethal disease with a fatality rate of approximately 10%. One reason that the SARS COVID-2 may be so versatile and therefore so successful has to do with this particular talent for binding and fusing with lung cells. One of the things I like to tell my clients is that the way it gains access, it actually uses mucus like super glue to glue itself to the cells of the cellular parts of the lungs, and then it gains access, inserts its DNA, and basically takes over your lung function, which is why a lot of times the first people that come to the door, their oxygenation is very poor. So viruses act as microscopic Trojan horses and take over the host cell machinery to deliver their genome, which is also known as genetic material, into the cell for initiating productive infection. Viral entry is extremely dynamic and it consists of multiple steps. You see the very complex activity to the left of your screen, and you can see that the process begins with a virion attachment to the cell surface, followed by a specific binding to receptors. Once the receptor engagement occurs, it allows the viruses to either directly release their genome into the cell at the plasma membrane, or to enter cells through endocytosis. So what is a vaccine? Vaccines are injections that come in the form of shots, liquids, pills, or nasal sprays that you take so that your body's immune system can recognize and defend against harmful germs. For example, there are vaccines to protect against viruses like the ones that cause the flu. And there's vaccines that are used to protect you against bacteria, including tetanus, diphtheria, and pertussis. Most vaccines contain germs or parts of germs that cause disease. The germs have been killed or weakened enough so that they won't make you sick, but they will spark an immune response, which helps your body fight off the germs. Your immune system will also remember the germ and attack it if that germ ever invades again. And this protection against a certain disease is called immunity. So 2 of the COVID-19 vaccines that are now authorized in the United States are messenger RNA vaccines. And messenger RNA vaccines teach your cells how to make a protein, or just a piece of a protein, that will trigger an immune response. If you look at the picture, messenger RNA is at the bottom of the screen, and it binds to its correlating DNA molecule to form a chain of DNA that is inserted into the cells and then takes over the cellular function. Now, the difference between the vaccines that we've gotten in the past and these current vaccines is they actually are generated from messenger RNA. So therefore that replication and transformation into an active disease will not occur. At least that's what they tell us now. This builds immunity and protects you from getting infected if the real virus enters your body. So what is the purported benefit of a vaccine? Vaccines are important because they protect you against many diseases. And since these diseases can be very serious, it's safer to get immunity from a vaccine than from getting sick with the disease. And for a few vaccines, getting vaccinated can actually give you a better immune response than getting the disease would. Vaccines not only protect you, they also protect the people around you. And this idea is called community immunity or herd immunity. And I'm going to say this twice. Herd immunity cannot exist without vaccination. Anything else is human sacrifice.
Okay, we have a video to share with you about the mRNA. So we're going to stop sharing and load that video so folks can get a perspective.
Developing vaccines is usually a very lengthy process, taking on average 8 years to get approved. Since a few years, we have the ability to create mRNA vaccines, which can be developed much faster. So how do these vaccines work? Are they safe, and how do they compare to traditional ones? But first you must understand how the immune system works. When a virus enters your body, it will attach itself to one of your cells and inject its DNA or RNA into it. This is like a blueprint for your cells, containing instructions on what the cell has to make. So in this case, the virus's RNA will tell your cell to make more copies of the same virus. They become factories assembling new copies of the virus that can infect even more cells. But don't worry, our bodies have a defense system for foreign intruders. The immune system attacks any protein, virus, or bacteria that does not belong in our bodies, but it takes a few days for it to learn how to attack the intruder. Meanwhile, the virus factories are running non-stop, quickly replicating the virus and spreading it in your body. In other words, you start experiencing symptoms of whatever has infected you. After a few days, however, your immune system will have figured out how to attack the virus and will start producing antibodies. These attach themselves to the virus, preventing them from infecting more cells and marking them for destruction. As you can see, the immune system is remarkable, but it's slow to mount an attack. That is the reason why we can get sick in the first place. So to give it a helping hand, we developed vaccines. The main idea is to train your immune system to recognize and fight off an infection before it has occurred. Almost like showing your immune system a mugshot of the virus and saying, if you see this, kill it. There are various types of vaccines, but let's take a look at the new kid on the block, mRNA vaccines. To understand how they work, let's take the COVID-19 pandemic as an example. You might have seen pictures of the virus with its distinctive spikes. These spikes allow the virus to attach to specific cells in your body and infect them. Now, here's the key idea for the COVID-19 vaccine. What if we could train our immune system to recognize these spikes by having our own bodies produce them? To do that, researchers took the virus's blueprint, its RNA, and isolated the part responsible for producing the spikes. Armed with this blueprint, they created mRNA, or messenger RNA. This is a special form of RNA that can enter your cells and give them instructions. In this case, the RNA contains instructions to build the spikes of the coronavirus. Not the virus itself, just the spikes. So mRNA vaccines contain instructions for your cells that tell them to build a part of a virus in large volumes, almost like giving them a recipe to follow. Once this is happening, your immune system kicks into action and starts learning how to attack these intruders. Again, it takes some time for the immune system to fight off these spikes, but you won't get sick because it's only the spikes, not the virus itself. And that's it. Your immune system has learned how to attack the spikes of the coronavirus. It destroys all the spikes and even breaks down the mRNA vaccine itself. The only thing left in your body are special B cells or memory cells. These can linger around for months or years until the same virus infects you again. When that happens, the B cells can produce the correct antibodies right away, preventing the virus from spreading and making you sick. What's interesting about this mRNA technique is that it's relatively quick to develop a vaccine as soon as we know the DNA or RNA sequence of a virus. And secondly, because the vaccine only makes our bodies produce a tiny part of a virus, we cannot get sick from it. More traditional vaccines use weakened versions of the actual virus. This also triggers an immune response, but could also give you mild symptoms. Now you know how mRNA vaccines work.
So let's talk about this history of mistrust. Why do we not trust? So the cultural mistrust. African Americans who do not trust the white majority health institutions tend to avoid sharing information with them. They avoid interacting with them and are apprehensive when asked to share information with them for fear of being betrayed or exploited. The Tuskegee experiment is an example of where this distrust has come from. There were 600 African-American participants, men in Macon County, Alabama, primarily sharecroppers, and many had never visited a doctor, and they were recruited by the promise of free medical care. The project aimed to study the full progression of the disease, and the disease that they were being treated or not being treated for was known as syphilis. Doctors from the United States Public Health Service ran the study. They informed the participants, which were 399 men with latent syphilis and a control group of 201 others who were free of the disease, that they were being treated for bad blood, which was a term commonly used in the area at the time to refer to a variety of ailments. The men were monitored, but only given placebos like aspirin and mineral supplements instead of penicillin, which would have cured it immediately. The public health service researchers convinced local physicians not to treat the participants in order to track the disease's full progression. And researchers provided no effective care as the men died, went blind, insane, or even experienced other severe health problems due to their untreated syphilis. In the mid-1960s, Peter Buxton, who was a venereal disease investigator for the Public Health Service, found out about the Tuskegee study and expressed his concerns to his superiors that it was unethical. And the response was that the Public Health Service officials formed a committee to review the study and decided to continue it. The goal was to track the participants until all had died and autopsies were performed and the project data could be analyzed. So as you can see, we are pretty justified in not having much trust in the system just because of examples like this. And I have another book called Medical Apartheid. It really expresses more and more of that information if you ever want to get a copy of it. It's by Harriet Washington. It's called Medical Apartheid. It gives a real full background on some of the horrors that we've experienced at the hands of the industry to promote health for others. Buxton leaked the story to a reporter friend who passed it on to another reporter. And that person was from the Associated Press named Jean Heller, who broke the story, which led to public outrage and shut down the study. By that time, 28 participants had perished from syphilis. 100 more had passed away from related complications. At least 40 spouses had been diagnosed with it, and the disease had been passed to 19 children at birth. As a result of the Tuskegee experiment, many African Americans developed a lingering deep mistrust of the public health officials and vaccine. And I'm gonna tell you, thanks to Howard University and other HBCUs, we now have more people that look like us that are represented in the health industry. And we are working very hard to make a difference, to regain the trust, and also to be able to provide the service and the level of care that our African-American patients deserve.
That's a perfect transition point, Terri. Thank you for that. So how do we pivot from this distrust towards managing the disparate issues that we encounter in healthcare and the risks that are impacting our Black communities and communities of color? We need, as Terri said, to find strategies to fully engage and hold accountable institutions and other stakeholders that have our lives in the balance. So it is imperative that we must do the research, we must conduct the due diligence that's required, and we need to identify advocates and leaders who can be our voice and represent us in places where we're not traditionally seen. And in this vein, Dr. Coots has stepped into the gap. Dr. Norvell Coots, the current president of Holy Cross Health Systems here in Maryland. He is a physician who comes to this through a family tradition, almost we could say, because he was inspired by his father, who was also a physician living in the Tulsa, Oklahoma area where he initially grew up. He ended up moving back to Tulsa to attend medical school and joined the U.S. Army, where he began his career through the Uniformed Services University, ultimately ending up as the Chief Executive Officer of Walter Reed Healthcare Systems here in Washington, D.C. And in his previous career in the military, serving as a Surgeon General for the U.S. Army and being in charge of the Joint Force Command in Afghanistan. Dr. Coots has also been at the Pentagon, and I believe, Van, you got your brass or stars and bars from the former President Obama, is my understanding.
That's
and
correct.
Currently, you are the Chief Operating Officer and the President of the Catholic Health Service System is Holy Cross Hospital. Under your direction, the hospital has become the second largest hospital in the state and has 423 beds that are licensed, which is critical because our own hospital at Howard, instead of increasing or maintaining, is declining. So that's a challenge for us in the community. And now Holy Cross Hospital has a distinction of being the facility with the most live births in the region. So as a proud Bison, Dr. Coots, got his swearing in through the Howard University Army ROTC program and attended Howard undergrad and Howard's medical school and completed his work at the University of Oklahoma. He is a board certified dermatologist. We know how challenging that is in the medical space, and focuses on strategy, working in the US Army and healthcare management, and involved in a number of different organizations, received numerous awards, merits, and acknowledgement, including from organizations such as the Legion of Honor from France and orders of different military services. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but we want to pivot this conversation around whether to vaccinate or not and what's over the horizon. So I'm turning it over to you, Dr. Coots.
Yeah, thank you very much for that kind introduction, and my sincere thanks to the Capstone Group for this opportunity to participate on the panel. So bottom line up front, no matter what you're seeing in the media, when you've seen this disease face to face, it's so much worse. So, you know, everyone wants to return to fun and return to a normal life. This is Town and Country magazine. I just got this on Saturday, and the first thing it says, get ready for the great comeback, cocktails, the party house, everyone wants to go to the club. But I think we really need to take a look at everything that's still, you know, in progress. And after more than a year, I recognize that we're frankly just tired of it. But we're starting to lapse on our protective procedures. And even with the vaccine, that is a harbinger of bad things to come. So what I want to do is give you a view from the health system, from a clinician's point of view, more or less, so that you can understand this pandemic as a way to emphasize the absolute need for everyone to get vaccinated. So for the past 58 weeks, we've been operating in crisis mode in every aspect of our hospital operations and care delivery, whether we're treating COVID or non-COVID patients, have essentially been impacted. So this was initially intensified by an absolute lack of national leadership, a shortage of PPE, inadequate testing, worsening by shortages of supplies of testing reagents, and for the first 2 months of the pandemic, a lack of viable treatments. We had absolutely nothing to treat these patients with. Misinformation bred mistrust, and we were left fighting an uphill public health battle as we prepared for what became the inevitable second surge. Due to COVID-19, the hospital in Silver Spring has been the leading platform for total bed days for these critically ill patients in the state in wave 1, as well as one of the top platforms for ICU patients, having actually tripled our ICU capacity at the height of the crisis in April through June of last year. So prior to COVID, our main claim to fame was as the #1 delivery platform in the state, as Claudette said, with more than 11,700 births a year. But among other capabilities, we're also known as one of the 5 special pathogen assessment hospitals through a special grant for the diagnosis and care of Ebola patients. And all of this was started under President Obama's administration. So over these past 58 weeks, we've cared for more than 6,200 patients with more than 2,900 requiring hospitalization. The special pathogen status gave us a bit of an edge in that we could conduct routine drills. You know, we had special decontamination stations. We had access to a cache of special PPE under the National Disaster Management System. And this was all especially for Ebola and chikungunya fever and other emerging pandemics. And we had actually been watching the development of this unusual new respiratory virus in China since around November. On the 15th of January, the virus hit the state of Washington. And on the 24th of January, it was here on the East Coast, and we received the first patient locally to rule out for COVID-19. That patient did, of course, rule out and was not positive. But at that point, we stood up our incident and command center and turned it on as of the 28th of February. And on the 4th of March, we diagnosed the first 2 cases of COVID-19 in Maryland. And then the following week, one of the first cases attributed to Washington, D.C. Our initial patients were elderly, mostly Asian, who had either traveled to China or had family members who had traveled to and from Asia. And then as the European strain appeared on the East Coast, we started to see a change in the ethnic impact to more Hispanic and people of African descent. Our inpatient numbers quickly jumped essentially by tens to 100, then to a high of more than 200 patients consistently for about a 4-week period, with more than a quarter of them requiring intubation on ventilators and many others requiring high flow oxygenation and proning, which is where you turn the patient over on their stomach so they can breathe a little bit easier. Our patients averaged about 8 inpatient days. However, we have had some patients who have been with us for more than 60 days before they were successfully discharged. We had to lease a 40-foot refrigerated trailer to hold all the bodies of the deceased that wouldn't fit in our morgue. And 58% of our deaths have been elderly and primarily those on ventilators. And thankfully, we saw a steady decrease in mortality from April, which was 23%, down to 20 to 16, but then back up again to about 23% in January, despite all of the treatments and things that we had. We lost some young ventilated patients as well. And as of today, our death rate is about 6.9%. So people actually are still dying. At the same time, though, we had cut off and curtailed elective procedures and our volumes had dropped, but they hadn't dropped off significantly because a lot of sick people were still actually coming, and the babies, of course, continued to be delivered. We battled to keep these patients alive with the medications that we had at the time, and we had to deal with a limited number of ventilators. We used a mixture of standard equipment, transport ventilators, anesthesia machines, anything that we could get that would move air in a patient until we were able to actually get the machines that we really needed. And at one point in time, we actually had to create a special ethics team to develop a policy for the allocation of scarce resources. And several times we were right on the verge of having to invoke that policy, essentially like doing combat triage on patients to determine who was more likely to survive if they were placed on a particularly scarce treatment or a piece of equipment versus those who wouldn't. We transferred a number of patients out to other facilities during this time. And so thankfully, we really never had to invoke that policy. Nonetheless, I'll tell you, there are still some members of my team who really almost essentially had PTSD and had a form of moral injury from even having to consider adopting a combat zone mentality. So we used hydroxychloroquine until its usefulness was scientifically refuted. We were initially a study site for remdesivir, and then for immunotherapy with convalescent serum, and for several other medications which were designed to block that immune cascade which is responsible for organ failure and death in these patients. Some of those were these biologics like tocilizumab, otilimab, and acalabrutinib. And although we were a study site for remdesivir, we were originally subject to a distribution model controlled at the federal level that actually restricted our access to the drug at our other hospital in Upper Montgomery County. And fortunately, that didn't last long. And then we were able to receive the amounts of the medication that we needed for the volume of patients that we actually had. We were a research site for interleukin-6, which is an anti-inflammatory medication, and even ivermectin, which is an anti-parasitic medication that actually seems to be useful in patients who've got multiple pneumonias layered on top of each other. We've also benefited by that emergency use authorization for monoclonal antibodies such as bamlanivimab, which are useful only within the first 10 days of the infection, but aren't very useful for hospitalized patients. And actually, we continue to learn new things about this disease on almost a daily basis. Well, right now, things are improving once again. Our daily COVID census is averaging about 50 patients now. Our ethnic demographic, though, hasn't changed appreciably. We're 44% Hispanic, 39% African-American patients. But the age group is mixed, seemingly right now tending to get a bit younger. And of course, their care is generally less critical and shorter. But let's be clear, though. We've seen a significant number of symptoms in a young population, an increased number of younger COVID-positive patients coming into the ED with stroke-like syndromes and with inflammation of the heart. So right now, we currently have more non-COVID-19 patients rather in the ICU and on ventilators than COVID-19 patients. We did create COVID-free zones. We resumed all elective and planned surgical procedures. We've got visitors in the hospital. We've got students back. We've really learned how to navigate and care for the COVID patients and segregate them from the non-COVID patients so that everyone could have access to care and be seen. And of course, we actually have also experienced vertical transmission of the virus into newborns, which complicated care in our NICU, our neonatal intensive care unit. Since the beginning of this pandemic, a little over a year ago, we've delivered more than 10,000 babies. So now we test every patient universally. And of course, we've been routinely testing every mother who comes in for deliveries for about the past 5 months. We test all of our surgical patients, and even sometimes an originally thought to be non-COVID patient turns into a COVID patient. And so we're still utilizing all those levels of PPE and protective measures with each patient as if they're COVID-19 positive. And just to give you a financial factoid, our financial outlay for PPE and protective gear has increased 440% over 2019. So we began vaccinating with the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine just before Christmas, and at the end of January, we started to receive the Moderna vaccine, and by February, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine came out as well. We've run our own clinics here at the hospital. We've partnered with some of the big mega churches in Montgomery County, in the Down County and the Up County, really trying to get into those Black and brown communities, the ones that are hardest hit by the virus. And to date, we've given just under 30,000 vaccinations. Now, when you look at the US stats, the US is 10% higher in cases than they were last week overall. And just to pick a state, in Michigan, where our higher headquarters in Trinity Health is, they've seen a 56% increase over this same time last week. And with spring break here now, we're possibly on our way to wave 3, or potentially at least a spike. So if I could get the next slide, please. So there are a number of threats that are still out here. To date, there have been more than 5,000 mutations that have been reported. So probably there have been maybe even double that we just don't know about. The ones that are most concerning to us, you've heard a lot about the UK B117, which is the predominant one in the UK and now in Italy and in France and in Germany and in Poland, is now here in the United States and is becoming the predominant strain of the virus. It was supposed to be done by the end of March. It's the end of March, so we can all suppose that it's here, and it's here in big numbers. In the UK, they saw it in high numbers in children. We have not yet exactly seen that, but we are just now starting to return children to school universally in most places. So I think once we do that in large numbers, we'll start to see it too. There is some concern that this UK 117 might actually be more lethal, and maybe that's why we came back to a 23% death rate in December and January, like we had at the very start of the virus. There's the UK B1525 variant, which is very similar to the 117. It's a very close relative. We really don't know what that means right now. It's only been seen in the UK. That one is not here in the US, but I'm sure it'll be here soon as well. And then there's the South African variant B1351, which has increased severity of symptoms, increased transmissibility, and maybe increased lethality too. We're not 100% sure about that. And the Brazilian P1, increased transmissibility. We really don't think it's going to necessarily be more lethal. It's certainly lethal in Brazil, but that is because they don't have the ventilators, the medications, and the equipment that we have here. There are 7 homegrown US variants that are all now starting to show that they share the same mutation, which is a prime example that viruses do what viruses do, which is they mutate. And this is a prime example of what's called convergent evolution, where a lot of dissimilar things will start to look alike. So they're all starting to have mutations in sort of the same locus in the RNA that codes for the spike protein. Next slide, please. So once you get COVID and you're discharged from the hospital, there are a lot of syndromes that people are developing, pieces and parts. Not everyone has everything, but certainly people have a lot of things that still continue with them for weeks, if not for months. And we really think that some of these are probably going to go on for years, but we just don't have that data yet because we're only 58 weeks really into this virus here in the United States. The first is COVID lung. You hear a lot about it. This is deep lower lung involvement, the alveolar, which is the small air sacs, with usually a COVID pneumonia and very often a bacterial pneumonia on top of it, and sometimes a fungal pneumonia even on top of that. And after discharge, it takes at least 60 days to recover oxygenation and get back to normal breathing, at least 60 days. Then there's the post-ICU syndrome. This is normally seen in patients who have been ventilated in the ICU for a long period of time, not necessarily just COVID patients, but COVID patients who have been in the ICU for a long time will show these same symptoms. So there are physical strength deficits. It takes a long time to get muscle mass back and everything. There is a cognitive decline. These patients have been isolated. Sometimes they've been placed in an induced coma. There are mental disturbances. It's like an ICU PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. There's temporal amnesia. They don't remember things, and that stresses people out when they have gaps in their life and people say, well, remember I came and talked to you, or the doctor came to visit and things like that, and they have no idea that any of these things actually happen. And then of course, this is often followed with depression. Then there's the brain fog. This is a common description of the neurologic impact. Sometimes it's a secondary effect of the virus, and sometimes we believe it may actually be a primary impact of the virus on the blood vessels in the brain or the brain tissue itself. Again, we don't know enough about this disease to pinpoint it exactly, but it probably is maybe even a combination of the both. So cognitive impairment in up to 25% of cases. Lack of clarity, people just say, man, I can't think straight, I can't remember things, poor concentration. Headaches are very common. And then numbness and tingling of the fingers and toes and the extremities. Next slide. There is a major cardiovascular syndrome, and this is mediated by those cytokines, by those inflammatory mediators in the body, and they cause damage to the heart muscle. So that's the cardiomyopathy, and ventricular arrhythmias, the irregular heartbeats, which sometimes can be responsible for sudden death. Hemodynamic instability, so wide swings in your blood pressure, high blood pressure, low blood pressure, high, low, and persistent inflammation that can last for weeks to months as well. You hear all these stories about the young athletes who have this cardiac syndrome, who were promising football players in high school or college, who probably will not be that because of the cardiac disease that they've had. There's a prolonged risk of blood clots and strokes. There's a chance you have blood clots and strokes while you're actually in the hospital, but when you get out, you're still at risk of having deep vein thrombosis in the legs and throwing a pulmonary embolism and things like this. It's especially more pronounced in people who have underlying hypertension and diabetes, and specifically type 2 diabetes. And then there's myalgic encephalomyelitis and chronic fatigue syndrome. Those things exist, but before COVID just amplifies them. And in a post-COVID period, you just can't get your strength. You can't exercise. You used to be a runner. You used to be able to run 5 miles in 20 minutes, and now you can barely walk a block in 20 minutes. And then postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, where you stand up and you say your blood pressure drops and your heart rate goes up and you feel very, very faint. People have that normally. Some women have that normally, but routinely, we're seeing that in patients with COVID who never had it before hospitalization, now have this as one of the continuing signs and symptoms that they have. Next slide, please. So the vaccines, next. We'll talk a little bit about kind of the comparing the vaccines. AstraZeneca is coming. It's not really here. If you saw the news, we just shipped an awful lot of it down to Mexico. We gave them several million doses of the vaccine because it hasn't cleared the FDA process here in the United States yet for another call for data. But if you look at the Pfizer, the Moderna, and the Johnson & Johnson, they really share a lot of the same common side effects, the trial effectiveness. So here's one of the issues. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine, whereas Pfizer and Moderna were 94, 95% effective against blocking the disease, Johnson & Johnson was only about 70% effective. And at first, we were filled with righteous indignation and said, oh no, you're not going to give this single shot, even though it's good, to Black and brown communities, to people that have been, so disproportionately affected by this, because it's a less effective vaccine. And that was that was social media, that was everything that was really drumming this up. The reality is it is a very good vaccine. It is a good vaccine to get into childcare providers, to people who are sick and shut in and can't get out and get the vaccine, and to people that you worry about their ability to come back and get a second dose of the vaccine. Give them whatever the vaccine that's available, take it. And the reality is they'll all work. They may not all protect you from getting the vaccine. And in fact, no vaccine really protects you from, or rather the virus, no vaccine really protects you from getting the virus. But what it does is it keeps you from having to go to the hospital and keeps you from dying. You have a much milder case of it if you do in fact get it. Although for a large number of people, it will 100% block them from actually developing the disease. Next slide, please.
So Van, while we're waiting to do that, this concept around herd immunity, can you just chat us through that as a quick second? I know Terri also has some thoughts around that herd immunity situation.
A certain large proportion of the people have to be able to get the vaccine and really be relatively immune to it to actually stop the development of the vaccine, to stop the spread of the vaccine. So you heard Dr. Fauci talk a lot about anywhere from 70 to 85% of the US population. You know, we will actually achieve that. We are actually on track to get to that level with the rollout of the vaccines. The rest of the world, I'm not so sure about, which means that there will always be a risk of this virus, or the next mutations of it coming from other parts of the world to us. Just like we're always afraid that people flying back from Africa will bring Ebola from Ebola areas too. We can develop herd immunity for ourselves, but if we constantly have an influx of the virus from other parts that are not vaccinated like us, it still puts us at a little bit of risk. Next slide.
So we want to talk about what's next. And one of the concerns is whether or not we can navigate our way through this pandemic successfully. And the overwhelming response from both yourself and Terri is to vaccinate, continue to use the mask, to do the hygiene and the sanitization, the physical and social distancing, and avoid large gatherings. But you also have some thoughts about what COVID is and how the vaccines support you as an individual. So want to emphasize that it's not a cure, right? So Terri, do you want to share with us your thoughts around this? And we kind of blend.
Yeah, I actually, it's funny because I just texted that out. I mean, I put that in the chat box. COVID vaccine is not a cure for SARS. So these people who are out here thinking just because they received a vaccination, that does not mean that you won't get COVID. You may get a milder form of it, but it doesn't mean that you can't transmit it to other people if you're a carrier. You really have to be on your guard because it's a horrible predator. You should know about your health status before signing up for any vaccination. Some of the lab tests that we're doing in the hospital setting is doctors are looking at cardiac enzymes and C-reactive protein to determine how well your heart is functioning. They may do liver function testing to see how well your liver is functioning. Remdesivir is one of those medications. If your liver enzymes are too high, you don't qualify for receiving that medication. Your CBC, which is a complete blood count with differential. Do you have any underlying infections or allergies? That could impact how you respond to even the vaccination, because I have allergies. So I had to be monitored for an hour before I could even leave after I got my Pfizer shot. But the only symptom I had was pain in my arm because I load up on supplements because I work at an all COVID hospital. We have today 96 patients that are COVID positive right now, and we spiked up. We were at 61, now we're at 96. So the numbers are increasing. Comprehensive metabolic panel, that looks at how well your kidneys are functioning. D-dimer is another lab test that looks at your risk for clotting. So we have protocols that are developed for each one of these symptoms and to help protect our patients against these possible side effects or results of being exposed to COVID. And procalcitonin, are your lungs at risk for severe infection? And of course, the thing that brings most people to the hospital is their oxygen saturation levels. Less than 94% makes it even more difficult to sustain life. So one of the things I say is herd immunity cannot exist without vaccination. The best treatment is preventative, and we should follow the CDC guidelines for prevention. But something else that we did in our pharmacy is as soon as we started finding out about COVID, we immediately started selling masks to our family members and our friends and educating them about keeping their hands clean. And we just sent out all kinds of literature and everything just to keep our families in tune. We also formed telephone links to family members. So every time something new happened, we shared. And I am truly happy to say that my husband's side of the family and my side of the family, thank God, nobody has reported that anybody has gotten COVID at all. And it takes education, and we stayed on top of it. We also have supplements that we recommend that people take as well. So I don't know if anybody's interested in that. We can talk about that.
We'll jump to that in a second, but Van, I want to bring you back into the conversation. Let's talk about what's on the horizon, because you have a unique perspective looking at it across the state globally and serving on the governors panels. and with your distinction in the healthcare field, some of the thoughts that you have about what we should be concerned about. Can you share with us?
Yeah, sure. So the first thing really is that, we have people called long haulers, and that's people who, after they're discharged from the hospital or after they've gotten over COVID at home and not needed hospitalization, they still have symptoms that linger for months, and we're not sure if they're not going to be there for years. Certainly, we know that people who have been severely affected by it, who have been hospitalized, who have been ventilated, who have survived and have been discharged, have significant lung damage, or they've got organ damage, neurologic symptoms, all those things we sort of talked about. So there are going to need to be specially targeted post-COVID-19 clinics, and this is going to emerge as a new business unit, not just in hospitals and health systems, but I think that you'll see, physical therapists in the community, community providers, gyms, even, with specially designed programs to help people kind of recuperate, restructure themselves, and regenerate months to years after they've gotten over this. There's a new emphasis on health equity. I mean, this virus has laid bare the inequalities and inequity of American health care and really shown the racist undertones of our American health system. There's no way around that. So we're now focusing on access. Telehealth, telemedicine has jumped 10 to 20 years farther down the road than it would have been. So this virus has been the great disruptor that we've all been waiting for. But really also now we're looking at how do we target people, get into those communities that are most underserved, diagnose chronic diseases, and treat those diseases, is really get upstream of those social influencers or social determinants of health to now keep them from even getting that. So health equity doesn't mean everyone has access to the same level of health care. What health equity means is the right care for the right person at the right time at the right place. Meaning I might be a type 2 diabetic and you might be a type 2 diabetic, but our care is going to be different based on our specific health needs. You're not just going to say, oh, Van and John, here, take this med, go do this. You can't. That's equality. That's not equity. So herd immunity, if we play this right, if we get these vaccinations, if we roll this out and we really get in there, we may reach herd immunity by late summer or early fall, just in time for kids to go back to school. And I pray to God, we will have a vaccine for the kids as they go back to school too. Will we need an annual booster shot? Probably so, because again, viruses do what viruses do, which is what they mutate. That's why we have to take a flu shot every year that's different, that's based on our prediction of what the mutations in the flu virus are going to be. So probably expect SARS COVID booster shots in the future. And then a real return to more normal life, I don't think until 2022.
Wow. That's an interesting perspective. So Terri, you were telling us that some of the things that have gotten your family through is working on strengthening their immunity, right?
I can tell you, Dr. Coots, if you could see my face right now, I am so excited. Oh my God. I've been teaching people about adrenal health for 14 years now. And I've been doing saliva testing for 14 years now. And I've been explaining to people that, do you know when the doctor looks at your adrenals, when you're in a critical care and they give you cosentropin to decide whether you should be a DNR or not? I said, why wait until you're in the emergency, in critical care and your adrenals are failing when we can deal with your adrenals now? The adrenal glands are amazing. And they're the one structure in the body that absolutely has to have vitamin C to function. So many things, and the cortisol, we talk about cortisol, we look at insulin. A lot of people don't look at insulin. They look at sugar, but they don't look at the pancreatic function from the C-peptide levels. I mean, we're doing this preventative care already. And it's like you said, you're going to start seeing more people working on preventative care, and people are going to take it more seriously now. One of the things I talk about is as far as strengthening your immune system. Green leafy vegetables are filled. What do we treat cancer, colon cancer with? Like things like leucovorin, which is a form of folic acid. Well, if you want to beat colon cancer, eat green leafy vegetables. They're loaded with folic acid. It's right in our food. We're using turmeric to make teas as an anti-inflammatory. We're taking Mucinex to thin the mucus so the virus can't attach itself as easily. It actually uses your mucus like super glue. And so that's why you get that thickened secretion when you get COVID. It's trying to attach itself using your own body's system because it's a predator like that. So we teach people about these type of things and how nutrition is so valuable. So if you eat right now and drink more water now and lose that weight and get control of your blood pressure, even if you get COVID, your outcome will be much better than if you don't do it. And the last thing I want to say too is COVID, although it may not be, it's the vaccination is not a cure, but you have more authority than you think. And the most important thing is if you actively wash your hands, if you wear your mask correctly. If you you make sure that you stay away from people that aren't wearing masks, but also your nutrition is so important. And not enough of that conversation is happening. And people in the hospital, if you have a paralyzed gut, the chances are you're not absorbing nutrients as well. So I've been telling people, maybe the patient might need a banana bag or something just to boost some immunity, just to feed some cells because they're not able to absorb as well. So I don't know how many people are really looking at that, but nutrition plays a key role in how well you will survive this thing.
And the other thing that we have emphasized over the course of the past few sessions we've had is learn how to practice self-care. It's critical that you have some kind of a routine, that you're getting access to fresh air, that you're staying physically and mentally active. You're designating some quiet time and setting some boundaries, nurturing and monitoring your relationships, and the binging of the social media and the news and all that in moderation, and as Terri said, cooking the healthy meals and so forth. One of the things that we have seen as a result of this pandemic is an uptick in suicide and mental health issues. Do not be afraid to reach out for assistance and help. We have provided for you the National Suicide Hotline. We are seeing suicides in populations, our youth, our Black men and women that we haven't seen before this pandemic. Mental health is critical. People living in isolation is a challenge for everybody. So don't be embarrassed to reach out for help, ask for help. Even in our Capstone Circle, we have lost people to suicide. So we can't emphasize enough that we need to be able to reach out for help, and there's nothing wrong in asking for help. And I will make this package available to anybody who's interested. If you want this information, put a note in the chat that you'd like us to send the information to you. And Terri has provided some of her recommendations around what works best in terms of helping you to build your immunity. And in the progress that has been made over the past year, there is even home testing available now. Pfizer has made a kit that you can take at home to be able to identify if you think you've been exposed. And lastly, we want to again emphasize mask is a deterrent. It will protect you and it protects others. So please, as Terri says, learn how to wear it correctly. Below your nose is not the right way, and make sure you have the right kind of mask that's going to provide you with the protection that you need. So at this point, we'd like to open up the floor to questions. And we already have a couple questions on the floor that have come forward. Shawande, is there anything specific that you want to address? If not, then I can start out with the ones that we got going into this meeting this evening.
Yeah, let's give our audience as much time as possible.
So one of the people who registered was very concerned about autoimmune diseases, and Terri and Van, I shared that with you coming into this meeting. So if you want to say in this public forum now, people that have autoimmune conditions such as sickle cell, what should they be concerned about in terms of any health risks or issues with the vaccine?
Yeah, so first let me say, if you're worried at all about any condition that you have and taking the vaccine, talk to your physician, talk to your family doctor. That's
Right.
most important. They know your care, or if they don't, go see someone and explain everything to them. Let them run tests and everything. But as a standard rule, there are not a lot of people that really should not get vaccinated. So can someone with sickle cell trait or even sickle cell disease get the vaccine? Yes, absolutely. And why? Because if they get COVID, it's going to magnify the sickling It's going to magnify their native disease, and it might then kill them. The only thing that we say is that, you know, when you get the vaccine, because of the immune response that it causes, and particularly if you get a 2-dose vaccine like Pfizer or Moderna, where the immune system is really revved up after the second one, you should drink a lot of water, drink a lot of fluids and things, stay well hydrated to make sure that your blood doesn't sludge as it's going through the immune response. So if you've got sickle trait or sickle disease, if you've got anything, the only people who shouldn't take it are people that have allergies to vaccine components, and even they can get it and be monitored, and people who have bleeding disorders. And that's not because the vaccine is going to cause a problem, but the needle stick itself might cause a problem. So if you have a history of bleeding disorders, then talk to your doctor and find out if it's safe to take the vaccine or not.
Thank you, Van. Terri, did you want to add anything to that?
Oh, no, I'm 100% in agreement. I tell everybody I start my day off with 4 cups of water before I walk out of the house, just to clean yesterday's dirt out. So that's the first thing you can do. I mean, if you're having bowel issues, 2 cups of water, wait 30 minutes, do 2 cups of water, and it will start moving yesterday's waste out. That's how you start your day. And if you want to clean up your liver, clean up your kidneys, add a half of a lemon to the water, and that will help change the pH of your blood to more, even though lemons are acidic, when they come out, they're more, they're less acidic. So it'll correct the pH of a very acidic diet. So if you eat a lot of meat and foods that are very acidic, sugary foods like that, they will help correct that. And your kidneys, your gallbladder, your liver will thank you for it. So,
Okay.
yes.
Thank you, Terri. Shawande, did you have a question from our guests?
No questions.
I saw one that popped up in reference to pregnant mothers, and that's near and dear to my heart. We recommend that all of our pregnant mothers take the vaccine. You know, we were one of the first places in the world to publish about the vertical transmission of COVID-19 from an infected mother to an infected newborn. New studies are showing that, you know, that pregnant mothers taking the vaccine may actually be very protective for that newborn too. And so even if they get a mild case of COVID-19 after they've had the vaccine, the baby is not born with COVID. Many of the mothers who have COVID-19, when they deliver, the babies are born with COVID-19. Not always, but in a large percentage of it. There are no contraindications right now to pregnant mothers getting it. However, check with your OBGYN, check with your physician, because you may have something special going on with your pregnancy that they may want to delay it a little bit.
Okay. I know one of the questions we come across is whether or not there's a cost associated with the vaccines. So as far as we understand right now, at least for the initial rounds, the federal government is fitting the bill for this. Van, can you confirm, or Terri, can you confirm that that's the case?
Yeah, so the federal government is covering the cost of the vaccines, and especially at federally run mass vaccination sites and state and county run mass vaccination sites, there is no charge. Hospitals and health systems and clinics that give the vaccine may charge your insurance for the actual giving the vaccine, not for the vaccine itself. And if you're uninsured and undocumented, of course, there are no charges because you don't have anything to pay with anyway.
Okay. Shawande, any questions in the chat?
Yes, we do. So does this one just came in? Does the fact that the AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson vaccines use an adenovirus vector rather than mRNA base affect the vaccine's efficacy?
No, it doesn't affect the efficacy of the vaccine. And because there are many vaccines that we give today that have adenoviruses as the vectors, that's very common for us. And you may be getting those vaccines without even recognizing it. What you may have is a little bit different symptomatology after the second dose of the vaccine. In that AstraZeneca, because that's a 2-dose vaccine. The Johnson & Johnson is a single dose. vaccine, and so you get the symptoms with the first shot anyway. But so the real answer is no. You take plenty of vaccines already that are adenovirus as a mediator.
Okay. And I just got a note that Dr. Wesolowski has a question.
Okay. You can unmute and ask the question.
I'm actually his student that he invited onto the chat. But
Okay.
so I'm not actually Dr. John, but I was wondering if, because there's all this talk about this vaccine being pushed as something we should all take as soon as we can, as soon as it's like all the most needy people get through, then we should try to make our way to take it ourselves. But there's a lot of people who are a little concerned about all the claims that, oh, it's perfectly fine, when it is still barely a year old. I think that shouldn't there be some more concern or just thoughtfulness for those people that that are a little hesitant to take it, that they should be that we should be okay with them not just jumping into it right away without seeing the long-term effects of it?
So no, I think at this point, you're starting to see the long-term effects. I mean, most of the studies were 3 months, some of them were 6 months. This vaccine actually started being developed almost as soon as it hit, because there was SARS CoV-1, and there was MERS CoV, which is a coronavirus as well. So back around 2013, 2012, 2013, we had MERS, and back in the 10s, we had SARS CoV-1. And so they've been working on a vaccine really ever since then. And that's why this one was actually able to be pushed out fairly quickly, because they figured out how to do mRNA vaccines. And in a lot of countries and in some big labs around the world, they've actually been testing vaccines similar to this. So yes, you're right. I mean, we've been at this pandemic 58 weeks, and they were able to create the vaccine fairly quickly. You saw the movie at the beginning that shows just how easy it is to make an mRNA vaccine. The reason we haven't had a lot of them is because of the lipid bilayer that they need to wrap the mRNA in to vaccinate, and that's why you have to have a super cold environment, especially for the Pfizer vaccine, to keep that stable. But you can wait. You can continue to wait until there's more data, but you run the risk of getting sick and dying.
Well, yes,
and that's the truth.
But I'm saying, shouldn't we as a society be more, don't you think we as a society are pushing it a little bit too heavily when people have seen that that vaccines take a long time, like years, to see how if there are long-term consequences or effects of certain vaccines, that we with this thought in mind, shouldn't we be more tolerant of people's hesitancy?
No.
Why?
You're not going to convince me any way other. I mean, I've seen far too much death. I've seen far too much sickness. This vaccine is a game changer. Our technology is getting better and better and faster and faster. I mean, just because a new computer comes out, and I know this is apples and oranges, but why do you wait to see if this new computer is good? People run out and get the first new phone and the first new watch because the technology is good. The technology around these vaccines is good. They've done the requisite studies to get this emergency use. And they continue to follow everyone who has the vaccine. For a few weeks after you get the vaccine, the FDA and CDC are constantly messaging you, what are your side effects? How are you feeling? Go to a doctor if you're not feeling well. So we're tracking everyone who gets the vaccine in the United States, and we continue to track the cohorts of people that were part of the studies for the vaccine. I mean, this is a pandemic that is still in progress right now, and you have to save the lives. So sometimes it's a leap of faith, and sometimes you have to take a little bit of risk. But in the risk benefit ratio, the risk of maybe getting a little sick from the vaccine is much, much less than the risk of not getting it and getting COVID and dying. And I'm
People
sorry,
have died
that's
from the
my
vaccine,
opinion.
you know.
That's just my opinion.
People have died from the vaccines
sorry,
already.
we have another question. If you all can maybe finish this in the chat, but Brianna Hartnett's been waiting. She has her hand up. She'd like to ask a question. And then after that, we're gonna circle to our capstone member, Maria Jones.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is John Rickards. I'm just borrowing Brianna's Zoom. I'm actually here tuned in with her. So I'm actually a fourth-year medical student, and my question mainly resolves around the pharmacological advances that we're making in terms of COVID. Because while I do agree that, you know, the vaccine will probably lead to the end of the pandemic, are there any advances that we're making outside of remdesivir that can be used as like abortive therapies for COVID? Because while we're speaking, we've already established that even if the pandemic ends, COVID will be around for a while. So is there anything like a Tamiflu that is in development that can also be applicable to COVID as we move forward?
Yeah, so I did read a study recently. That a couple of the vaccine manufacturers, Pfizer being one, are working on an oral medication right now. I mean, that's certainly the next step. I mean, the only thing that we really have right now, other than the vaccines, are the biologics and the antibody solutions, the cocktails of the antibodies you can get. And like I said, we're also finding that things like ivermectin, which has been used very broadly in veterinary medicine for a long time, may actually have some benefit in the lungs and not just as treatment as protective. So honestly, we are learning new things about this disease on a daily basis. And there are tons of really brilliant minds that are working at this all around the world. So I think that there are going to be some dramatic things that actually come out of this over the next year. But for right now, what do we have to save people? We have what we have.
Okay, Maria, you had a question?
With all due respect to Dr. Coots and Dr. Peters, I agree with the student. I mean, I think that we shouldn't just discount people's fear and people's hesitancy around vaccines, given the, you know, the history that was stated by Dr. Peters about the problem with, you know, mistrust of the medical industry. I do not trust the medical industry at all. Okay. And my question is, so if we look at countries like New Zealand and other countries who have been able to eradicate basically COVID-19 naturally, why aren't we? But wait, I know the answer. That's because pharmaceuticals and vaccines are a billion-dollar industry, trillion-dollar industry. And if anytime that you have, you know, America, which is a capitalist society, then boom, you're going to be pushing vaccines instead of natural healing, natural health. You know, my thing is, if you eat these green and leafy vegetables and you do all of the things that Dr. Peters was saying, we could do that as a society, but we're leaning on the money, on the billion-dollar industry part of it. So that's my take. My family has been able to avoid it through diet and what we eat and the exercise and all the things that she has stated. So that's how we're, you know, vaccinating ourselves. Thanks.
Can I speak on that? Can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Okay, so what we did, I decided to, because I sounded like you at the beginning. I sounded exactly like you because I did not promote vaccinations. Again, because of the number of children that I've dealt with that have autism, and I've had to compound medications for them where they got a bunch of vaccinations too soon before the immune system was strong enough, and they ended up becoming autistic. But one of the things that made me decide to go ahead and get the vaccine is, number one, I have a daughter that lives with me. Number two, I work in a COVID hospital, so I'm exposed every day to the potential of getting COVID myself. So what did I do for myself? Before I walk out of my house, I take probably about 11 capsules a day just to boost my immune system, B vitamins, vitamin C, berberine. I do load up on supplements. So that's part of our educational process with our clients is we talk about nutrients, we talk about supplementation, and because of because of my pharmacy background, I'm able to take those chemical entities and help you understand what it actually does with your body's chemistry. However, if you are working in a place where you're exposed to a lot of people that could give you COVID, you might want to consider getting the vaccination. I never try to push the vaccination or anything, but I will give you enough information so you can make a decision for yourself based on facts and not just based on me saying, do it because I said so. I don't do that. I don't do this, that patriarchal thing that has been taught in our society. No, you should make informed decisions, period. That is why Dr. I'm sorry.
Dr. Coots.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Coots and I are even here today is because we're sharing the knowledge with you that you're probably not going to get from other places so that you can have the insider's track to educating yourself so that you can educate other family members and friends and people around you as to why they should consider or even not consider. But at least you'll have facts, you'll have information based on two people who are very passionate about making sure you have the information. And that's why we're in a good place to be here for you, to educate you, to give you encouragement, and to guide you through the process. So if you get the shot, right? Because I got both shots. So I put my money where my mouth is. I'm not telling you something that I have not done. And I had no symptoms at all. I didn't get a fever. I didn't get the night sweats. I got nothing because you know what? I drink a lot of water and I supplemented myself before I even got the shot. Then I supplemented myself after I got the shot. So, you know, I haven't had the extreme fatigue and all those other symptoms that you hear about because I protected my cells first. Then I got the shot. The other thing is people who have died from COVID, a lot of people are not getting tested before they get the vaccination and they actually have COVID when they get the vaccination. So that's why they do a lot of checks and balances to make sure to rule out that you even have COVID before you get the shot. But unfortunately, some people have this, are symptomless. Because they don't have the symptoms, they're not necessarily going to know that they have COVID. And unfortunately, when they get the vaccination, they may have a negative outcome, or they could be allergic to some of the components of the vaccine, which I looked at the components and guess what? The hair care products you're putting on your head, the skincare products you're slathering on your bodies have the same chemical entities in them. I'm a compounder, so I know all those ingredients. I'm familiar with them because some of them we use in compounding. So I was like, okay, if I can put this in my hair, I certainly can take the shot because I'm applying it to my skin and your skin will absorb it. So, you know, nutrition, water, water, water. Educate yourself on what you can do to build your system up on a cellular level so that we get exposed to cancer cells every day. But it's our body's immune system that fights that battle for us. So you don't know that you have been exposed to cancer. That's my take on it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And that's a perfect time to go to the poll because we have about 2 minutes. So we'll go to the poll.
Can Shawanda, if there are other questions, can they put them in the chat so that we can get back to?
Yeah, I announced that. Mm-hmm.
While they're taking the poll, can I respond to this information? I see something about multiple medical conditions.
Sure.
I'm diabetic, just so you know, just to share some information. I'm diabetic and I took the vaccination. And as you know, in all of the lists, they say the people who will have the worst outcomes are people that have diabetes and hypertension. So I'm a diabetic and I actually did take the shot. And again, I had no symptoms because I control my diabetes with supplementation and diet.
Were there other questions in the chat that we can go through while folks are taking the poll? Anybody else want to raise a question? The COVID passport, I see that somebody's put that out there. New York City, to the best of my knowledge, is the only state in the USA right now that's talking about a digital COVID passport, which will track your status in terms of whether you've received the vaccine and depending on what your needs are in terms of traveling or I'll call it mingling in certain forums, like in New York in particular, going to Yankee Stadium or one of those places. They want to be able to identify that the people coming in to that environment are people who are not testing positive or who are asymptomatic to some degree. At some point in the future, it will probably be a requirement. The EU is talking about having a COVID passport right now. And depending upon the amount of variants that are floating, it's probably going to be something that's going to be required to travel on cruise ships, maybe the airlines and so forth, and probably using some more technology, the blockchain technology. But it's something policy-wise and evolution.
Yeah, and I think it's a relative risk sort of thing too, because you know, you can still get COVID with the vaccine. You can still be asymptomatic on the vaccine. It lowers the risk, but it's not 100% guarantee that just because you've got a COVID passport, you don't have COVID. So I think they're trying to balance, again, it's a risk ratio, you know, so I don't know, we'll just have to see what comes.
I'm confused. You mentioned something about COVID and the blockchain technology.
That's
Would you mind?
the passports, the testing passports. That's how they're planning to deliver them, because blockchain is immutable. Once the information is entered, it cannot be tampered with. So they're calling a digital, quote unquote, digital passport, and they're going to use the blockchain technology to use and develop that passport. Sherelle, can you come off mute and ask the question? Sherelle Green?
Hi, yes, I can. Hi, everyone, and good evening. I really appreciate this program and just the information that it's given. I did want to follow up because it looks like people were bringing up the government's involvement in COVID-19 and the pandemic. And I was wondering, from like a public health standpoint, how do you feel the federal and state governments have fallen short in their responses to COVID-19? And what steps do you think our state and federal governments, what steps should they take next in tackling this fourth wave since it's coming, especially since we've seen, you know, the Miami spring break videos, we've seen different governors release the mask wearing policies. So where do you guys think that we should do next?
I know how Terri feels. I'm going to go to Van first and let Terri speak afterwards.
Yeah, no, I think this has been an abject failure on the part of the federal government, and then the states weren't a lot better because there was no uniformity and unanimity around the approach to this vaccine. I mean, not the vaccine, but to this virus. I think now that we have a new administration, you're starting to see a lot more federal focus in trying to come up with a unified approach to it. However, we still have independent governors who can you know they basically run their state, and it's divided right down the red-blue political lines more or less. And so it balancing people's lives still becomes a political issue. And so that's about all I can say. I would like to see more uniformity, and I would like to see all the governors get together and follow the lead of the federal government and kind of all have one standard set of rules, mask, hand wash, you know, slowly reopen on the same sort of pattern and path and timeline, as opposed to this state is fully open, this state is fully closed, because you'll never really get control of the virus. You know, to your earlier point around New Zealand was successful because they had a uniform approach across all parts of New Zealand, and it's an island country, and you can close the borders. Places like Korea had good results at front because they have a populace that follows directions and follows orders, and the very uniform approach across all the different states or counties in the Republic of Korea. The United States is just not like that and never will be. And so this is going to be our issue and our problem until the end of this pandemic, and probably with whatever the next pandemic is coming to.
Well, that's it for our event. We hope you've enjoyed it. If you'd like to become a member of the Capstone Group or make a donation to our scholarship fund, click on the link below. Take good care and enjoy.